ISO 600 Group Audits. The group engagement partner is responsible for the direction, supervision and performance of the group audit. The auditor should first determine whether to act as the auditor of the group financial statements. And if acting as the auditor of the group financial statements, the auditor should communicate clearly with component auditors about the scope and timing of their work on financial information related to components and their findings. The auditor should obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence about the financial information of the components and the consolidation process to express an opinion on whether the group financial statements are prepared, in all material respects, in accordance with the applicable financial reporting framework. Auditor's report on the group financial statement shall not refer to a component auditor. If a reference to a component auditor is required by law or regulation, the report shall indicate that this reference does not diminish the group auditor's responsibility for the group audit opinion. The component auditor therefore has no responsibility for the group auditor's opinion. If the opinion on a component is qualified, the group audit opinion is only affected if the matter is material to the group. Only a matter which is material in a group context will affect the group audit opinion. Balances contained within only the parent company financial statements will also have an effect on the group financial statements. For example, the parent's statement of financial position will include investments in subsidiaries as non-current assets, and the parent's statement of profit or loss will include dividend receipts from subsidiaries. The group auditor must obtain sufficient appropriate evidence in respect of these, in order to express an opinion on the financial statements of the parent as well as on the group. ISO 600 places special emphasis on the need for the group auditor to determine whether or not to accept the appointment. This is particularly important here because it is possible for it to be straightforward to audit the parent company, but impossible to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence about the rest of the group. If the group engagement partner concludes that it will not be possible to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence on the group and that this is serious enough to result in a disclaimer of opinion, then the engagement should not be accepted. For this purpose, the group engagement partner must obtain an understanding of the group before acceptance. The component auditor should consider whether there might be any restrictions on them providing the group auditor with access to information, such as laws relating to confidentiality or data privacy. Obtaining an understanding of the group, its components and their environments. Possible sources of obtaining an understanding of the group, its components and their environments include information provided by group management, communication with group management, communication with the previous group engagement team, component manager, or component auditors. The group auditor should consider the following matters when obtaining this understanding. The group structure. Components' business activities including the industry and regulatory, economic and political environments in which those activities take place. Description of group-wide controls. The complexity of the consolidation process. Whether the group engagement team will have unrestricted access to information. In the case of continuing engagements, the group engagement team's ability to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence may be affected by significant changes, for example changes in group structure, changes in business activities and concerns regarding the integrity and competence of group or component management. The group auditor will not be able to simply rely on the conclusions of the component auditor. ISO 600 requires the group auditor to evaluate the reliability of the component auditor and the work performed. This will then determine the extent of further procedures. The group auditor should assess whether the component auditor is independent and understands and will comply with the ethical requirements that are relevant to the group audit. The component auditor's professional competence. Whether the group engagement team will be involved in the work of the component auditor to the extent that it is necessary to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Whether the component auditor operates in a regulatory environment that actively oversees auditors. The group engagement team may obtain this understanding in a number of ways. In the first year, for example, the component auditor may be visited to discuss these issues. Alternatively, The component auditor may be asked to confirm these matters in writing or to complete a questionnaire. Confirmations from professional bodies may also be sought, and the reputation of the firm will be taken into account. These are distinguishes between significant components and other components which are not individually significant to the group financial statements. A component identified by the group engagement team, A, that is of individual significance to the group, or B, that, due to its specific nature or circumstances, is likely to include significant risks of material misstatement of the group financial statements. If component assets, liabilities, cash flows, profit or turnover exceed 15% of the related group figure, then the auditor may judge that the component is a significant component. If a component is financially significant to the group financial statements, then the group engagement team or a component auditor will perform a full audit based on the component materiality level. The group auditor should be involved in the assessment of risk in relation to significant components. If the component is otherwise significant due to its nature or circumstances, the group auditors will require one of the following: a full audit using component materiality, or an audit of specified account balances related to identified significant risks, or specified audit procedures relating to identified significant risks. Components that are not significant components will be subject to analytical procedures at a group level. A full audit is not required. The group auditor is responsible for setting the materiality level for the group financial statements as a whole. Materiality levels should also be set for components which are individually significant. These should be set at a lower level than the materiality level of the group as a whole. The group auditor may be involved in the work of a component auditor. The extent of this involvement at the planning stage depends on significance of the component, risks of material misstatement of the group financial statements, and extent of the group auditor's understanding of the component auditor. The basic rule is that where the component is significant, the group auditor must be involved in the component auditor's work. The group auditor may perform the following procedures: meeting with the component management or the component auditors to obtain an understanding of the component and its environment, reviewing the component auditor's overall audit strategy and audit plan, performing risk assessment procedures to identify and assess risks of material misstatement at the component level. These may be performed with the component auditor or by the group auditor. Where the component is a significant component, the nature, timing and extent of the group auditor's involvement is affected by their understanding of the component auditor, but at the minimum should include the following procedures: discussion with the component auditor or component management of the component's business activities that are significant to the group. Discussing with the component auditor the susceptibility of the component to material misstatement of the financial information due to fraud or error. Reviewing the component auditor's documentation of identified significant risks of material misstatements. The group auditor may not be able to access all the information it needs about components or component auditors, for example because of laws relating to confidentiality or data privacy. The effect on the group audit opinion depends on the significance of the component. If the component is not significant, then it may be sufficient just to have a complete set of financial statements, the component auditor's report, and information kept by group management. If the component is significant, then it is possible that there will be an inability to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence about the component, in which case the audit opinion is either qualified or a disclaimer of opinion is issued. In this case it would also be impossible to comply with the 600 Singapore S requirement to be involved with the work of the component auditor for significant components, which would also lead to an inability to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence. For all companies in the group auditor is required to perform a review of the work done by the component auditor. This is normally achieved by reviewing a report completed by the component auditor which highlights the key issues which have been identified during the course of the audit. The effect of any uncorrected misstatements and any instances where there has been an inability to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence should also be evaluated. On the basis of this review, the group auditor then needs to determine whether any additional procedures are necessary. These may include designing and performing further audit procedures. These may be designed and performed with the component auditors, or by the group auditor. Participating in the closing and other key meetings between the component auditors and component management. Reviewing other relevant parts of the component auditor's documentation. ISO 600 prescribes the types of information that must be sent by the group auditor to the component auditor and vice versa. The group engagement team shall communicate its requirements to the component auditor on a timely basis. This communication shall set out the work to be performed, the use to be made of that work, and the form and content of the component auditor's communication with the group engagement team. These communications include a request that the component auditor confirms their cooperation with the group engagement team, the ethical requirements that are relevant to the group audit, and in particular independence requirements, component materiality and the threshold above which misstatements cannot be regarded as clearly trivial to the group financial statements, identified significant risks of material misstatement of the group financial statements due to fraud or error that are relevant to the work of the component auditor. The group engagement team requests the component auditor to communicate any other identified significant risks of material misstatement and the component auditor's responses to such risks. A list of related parties. The group engagement team shall request the component auditor to communicate matters relevant to the group engagement team's conclusion with regard to the group audit. These communications include whether the component auditor has complied with ethical requirements that are relevant to the group audit, including independence and professional acceptance, whether the component auditor has complied with the group engagement team's requirements, identification of the financial information of the component on which the component auditor is reporting, information on instances of non-compliance with laws and regulations that could give rise to material misstatement of the group financial statements. A list of uncorrected misstatements of the financial information of the component. Indicators of possible management bias. Description of any material deficiencies identified in internal control over financial reporting at the component level. Other significant matters that the component auditor communicated or expects to communicate to those charged with governance of the component, including fraud or suspected fraud involving component management, employees who have significant roles in internal control at the component level, or others where the fraud resulted in a material misstatement of the financial information of the component. ISO 600 identifies the following as matters which should be communicated to group management. Material deficiencies in the design or operating effectiveness of group-wide controls. Material deficiencies that the group engagement team has identified in internal controls at components that are judged to be significant to the group. Material deficiencies that component auditors have identified in internal controls at components that are judged to be significant to the group. Fraud identified by the group engagement team or component auditors, or information indicating that a fraud may exist. Where a component auditor is required to express an audit opinion on the financial statements of a component, the group engagement team will request group management to inform component management of any matters that they, the group engagement team, have become aware of that may be significant to the financial statements of the component. If group management refuses to pass on the communication, the group engagement team will discuss the matter with those charged with governance of the group. If the matter is still unresolved, the group engagement team shall consider whether to advise the component auditor not to issue the auditor's report on the component financial statements until the matter is resolved. The following matters should be communicated to those charged with governance of the group. An overview of the type of work to be performed on the financial statements of the component. An overview of the nature of the group engagement team's planned involvement in the work to be performed by the component auditors on significant components. Instances where the group engagement team's evaluation of the work of a component auditor gave rise to a concern about the quality of that auditor's work. Any limitations on the group audit, for example, where the group engagement team's access to information may have been restricted.